Have you ever felt instantly forgotten? You want to be missed. Not in a clingy way, not in a desperate way. Just, you want to matter. You want to walk out of a room and have people feel it. That quiet shift in energy. That moment where someone thinks, I wish they were still here. And right now, if you're being completely honest with yourself, you're not sure that's happening. Maybe you leave conversations and wonder if anyone even noticed. Maybe you're surrounded by people, but somehow still feel invisible. Maybe you're doing everything right on the surface, showing up, being friendly, putting in the effort, and still feeling like you're not leaving any kind of mark. That feeling is real, and it's more common than anyone admits. But here's what nobody tells you. The people who are genuinely missed, the ones who walk out and leave a room slightly quieter, slightly emptier, they're not more attractive, more successful, or more naturally charismatic than you. They're not doing grand gestures or saying perfectly crafted things. They've just built 7 tiny habits. So small, most people never even notice them. So powerful, they permanently change how people feel in your presence. And there's one habit on this list, one specifically, that's going to hit different. Because it's not what you do, it's what you stop doing. You'll know it when we get there. Number 1, be fully present. Here's a question nobody asks. When was the last time someone was completely, entirely, 100% there with you? Not half there. Not nodding while scrolling through their phone mentally. Not waiting for their turn to speak. Actually there. Eyes on you. Mind on you. Like nothing else in the world existed for those few minutes. Think about it honestly. If you're struggling to remember, that's not an accident. That's how rare it actually is. We live in a world where everyone is physically present and mentally somewhere else. Mid-conversation, eyes drifting to phones. Responses that prove the other person heard your words but missed your point entirely. That subtle but unmistakable feeling that you're talking at someone, not with them. And here's what that does to people, even subconsciously. When someone only half listens, your brain quietly registers it as, I'm not worth their full attention. You don't think it consciously, but you feel it, and you remember it. Now flip that completely. When someone gives you their full, undivided presence, even for just a few minutes, your brain does something fascinating. It releases oxytocin, the same chemical tied to trust, warmth, and emotional bonding. And it anchors that feeling directly to the person who created it. You don't just remember the conversation. You remember them. This is what fully present people do differently. Phone face down, body turned toward you. They're not thinking about what they'll say next. They're actually absorbing what you're saying right now. And when they respond, it proves they were listening. Not just hearing, actually listening. That difference is everything. Most people think presence is passive, just shutting up while someone talks. It's not. Presence is active. It's a choice you make every single time someone starts speaking to you. And the people who make that choice consistently, they become the people whose absence is felt. Because when you've experienced what it feels like to have someone's full attention, even once, you notice immediately when it's gone. And you miss it. Which brings us to habit 2. Because presence gets people to enjoy talking to you. But the next habit? That's what makes them feel genuinely understood. And those are 2 very different things. Number 2, listen deeply. Most people think they're good listeners. They're not. And it's not entirely their fault. Nobody ever taught us what listening actually means. We grew up thinking listening was just not talking, staying quiet while the other person finishes, waiting for your turn. That's it. But that's not listening. That's just silence with an agenda. Real listening, deep listening, is something completely different. And the people who do it, they create something in others that is almost impossible to explain, but absolutely impossible to forget. Here's what actually happens when someone truly listens to you. Not just your words, but what's underneath your words. The frustration hiding behind, I'm fine. The exhaustion underneath, just been busy. The loneliness wrapped inside, things are okay. When someone hears that, the thing you didn't even fully say, something shifts. You don't just feel heard. You feel known. And feeling known is one of the deepest human needs we have. Psychologists at Harvard found that the quality of our relationships, not wealth, not status, not achievement, is the single greatest predictor of long-term happiness. And at the core of every deep relationship is one thing, the feeling that someone actually gets you. Deep listeners create that feeling. Consistently. Almost effortlessly. So what do they actually do differently? They listen to understand, not to respond. There's a subtle but massive difference. When you listen to respond, your brain is already half gone, composing your next sentence, finding your own related story, preparing your advice. The other person can feel that. They might not say it, but they feel it. Deep listeners stay. They let the other person finish, fully finish, before their brain even begins forming a response. They ask one follow-up question that proves they were actually paying attention. They reflect back what they heard, not word for word, but in a way that shows they caught the feeling, not just the facts. That one habit, staying just a little longer in someone else's experience before rushing to your own, changes everything about how people feel around you. Because in a world where everyone is waiting to talk, the person who actually listens feels like oxygen. And when they leave, you notice, because suddenly, there's nobody left who actually hears you. Which makes you wonder, is listening enough? What if someone listens perfectly, but forgets everything you said the moment you walk away? That's exactly what habit 3 fixes. And it's smaller than you think. And honestly, if these first 2 habits already made you think of someone in your life, drop their name in the comments. Not tagging them, just acknowledging that they exist. Because people who make us feel seen deserve to be recognized, even quietly. Number 3, remember small details. Let me paint a picture. You're talking to someone, casually, nothing serious. You mention offhand that you've been stressed about a job interview coming up next week. It's a small detail. You move on. The conversation continues. You forget you even said it. 2 weeks later, that same person sees you and says, "Hey, how did that interview go?" And something stops you completely. Not because it's a big deal, but because out of everything happening in their life, their own stress, their own problems, their own noise, they held on to something you said. Something small. Something you didn't even think was worth remembering. That feeling is disproportionately powerful. And most people can't explain why. Here's why it hits so hard. When someone remembers a small detail you shared, your brain doesn't process it as a good memory. It processes it as evidence. Evidence that you were genuinely paid attention to. Evidence that you mattered enough to be remembered. Researchers call this relational attunement, the sense that someone is emotionally tuned into your life, not just your presence. And relational attunement is rare, genuinely rare. Most people forget within hours, not because they don't care, but because they were never fully listening in the first place. They were present in body, somewhere else in mind. And so the details just slip through. But the people who remember, they've built a habit so simple it almost feels too small to matter. They pay attention with the intention of remembering. That's it. One small mental shift, from passive hearing to active storing. A quick note in their phone after a conversation. A mental flag on something that mattered to the other person. And then, when the moment comes, they bring it back. Not to impress, not to perform, just because they actually cared enough to hold on to it. And to the person on the receiving end, that feels like everything. Because being remembered, truly remembered, is one of the quietest, most powerful ways to tell someone, "You matter to me." No grand gesture, no expensive gift, just proof that they existed in your thoughts when they weren't even in the room. That's what makes people miss you. Now, remembering someone is one thing. But what happens when they're going through something hard? What happens when they don't need you to remember, they need you to understand? That's where most people completely fall apart. And it's exactly what habit 4 is about. Number 4, validate their feelings. Picture this. You've had a genuinely terrible day. Not dramatic, not crisis level. Just one of those days where everything felt slightly wrong, and by the end of it, you're emotionally drained in a way you can't fully explain. You tell someone about it, and they say, "Oh, it'll be fine. Just think positive. At least it's not that bad." And somehow, you feel worse. Not because they said anything cruel, but because in the moment you needed to feel understood, they handed you a solution instead. They skipped past your feeling entirely and jumped straight to fixing it. Like your emotion was an inconvenience that needed to be resolved as quickly as possible. Most people do this, constantly, automatically, and it quietly pushes people away in ways they never even realize. Here's what's actually happening psychologically. When you're experiencing a strong emotion and someone immediately tries to fix it or minimize it, your brain registers a subtle but sharp form of rejection. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that makes you think twice before opening up to that person again. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation, and studies show it's one of the primary reasons people feel lonely even in relationships. Not because nobody is around, but because nobody actually acknowledges what they're feeling. The people who are most missed do the opposite. They validate first, always, before the advice, before the reframe, before the silver lining. They sit with you in the feeling for a moment, not to fix it, but to acknowledge it. A simple, "That sounds genuinely exhausting," or "I can understand why that got to you," does something to the nervous system that no solution ever could. It says, "Your feeling makes sense. You're not overreacting. You're not too much. I see you." And when someone makes you feel that, consistently, reliably, without judgment, you start to associate their presence with safety. Real safety. The kind where you don't have to perform or minimize or explain yourself. And when that person leaves, you feel their absence in a very specific way, because the world suddenly feels a little less safe without them in it. Which makes you wonder, what about the good moments? What about when things are going right? Because how someone shows up for your wins matters just as much as how they show up for your struggles. Maybe more. And that's exactly what Habit 5 reveals. Number 5, celebrate their wins. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You get good news. Something you've been working toward, maybe for months. And you're genuinely excited. That rare kind of excited where you actually want to share it with someone. So you do. And they say, "Oh nice, congrats." And then immediately pivot to talking about themselves. Or they give you a polite smile and move on. Or worse, they find a way to subtly minimize it. "Oh, that's cool, though it must have been pretty competitive, right?" A lot of people probably applied. And just like that, the excitement deflates. Not because they were cruel, but because they weren't genuinely there for your moment. And something about that stings in a way that's hard to articulate. Here's why it hurts more than it should. Psychologists at UCLA studied how couples respond to each other's good news, and what they found was striking. It wasn't how people responded to struggles that predicted relationship quality. It was how they responded to wins. Active, enthusiastic celebration of someone else's good news, what researchers call active constructive responding, was one of the strongest predictors of long-term bonding and satisfaction. Not sympathy. Celebration. Most people are decent at showing up for someone's pain. But genuine, unguarded excitement for someone else's success? That's rarer than most people realize. Because celebration requires something uncomfortable, setting your own ego completely aside. No comparisons. No subtle one-upping. No redirecting. Just pure, clean enthusiasm for another person's moment. Wait, seriously? Tell me everything. How did it happen? How are you feeling right now? That's it. That's the whole habit. Asking more. Leaning in. Making their win feel as significant to you as it does to them, even for just a few minutes. And the people who do this consistently, they become rare. They become the person you want to call first when something good happens. Not just when you need support, but when life is actually going well. Because everyone wants someone in their corner for the hard days. But the people who are truly missed, they're the ones who show up just as hard for the good ones. Now, we've talked about what to do, but habit 6 is different. Because it's about what you need to stop doing. And this is the habit I mentioned at the very beginning. The one that's going to hit different. Because most people do this every single day thinking it makes them helpful. It doesn't. If this video is hitting close to home, and I have a feeling it is, hit that like button right now. Not for me. Just because something in you recognized the truth in what we're talking about. And that recognition deserves to be honored. Number 6, hold back unsolicited advice. This is the one. The habit I mentioned at the very beginning. The one that isn't about what you do. It's about what you stop doing. And when you hear it, you're going to think of every single conversation where you got it completely wrong. So did I? So does almost everyone. Here's the scenario. Someone comes to you with a problem. Maybe it's work stress, a difficult relationship, a decision they can't figure out. And before they've even finished talking, your brain is already there. Already solving. Already assembling the advice, the perspective, the solution that's going to fix everything. And so you share it. Because you care. Because you want to help. Because that's what helping looks like, right? Wrong. Here's what's actually happening on the other side of that conversation. The moment you offer advice nobody asked for, something shifts in the other person. Subtly, invisibly, but powerfully. Their brain registers a quiet but sharp message. You think I can't handle this on my own. That's not what you meant. But that's what they felt. Psychologists call this a threat to autonomy. And research consistently shows that unsolicited advice, no matter how well-intentioned, triggers a defensive response in the brain. Not gratitude. Not relief. Defensiveness. Because buried underneath every unrequested solution is an implied judgment. You're doing this wrong, and I know better. And people feel that, even when they smile and say thank you. The most missed people in anyone's life have quietly mastered something that goes against every instinct. They hold back. They let you talk. They ask what you need before assuming they know. Sometimes they simply say, "Do you want advice, or do you just need to vent?" That one question changes everything. Because it hands the power back to you. It says, "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here for you." And that distinction, as small as it sounds, is the difference between someone who feels helpful and someone who feels genuinely safe. And safe people are magnetic. Because safety is rare. In a world where everyone has an opinion, and answer, a better way. The person who simply holds space without immediately trying to improve you feels like a gift. That's who gets missed. Not the person with the best advice. The person who made you feel like you didn't need to be fixed in the first place. And that brings us to the final habit. Habit 7. The last thing these people do, and arguably the simplest one on this entire list. But don't let that fool you. Because the way you end an interaction determines everything about how someone remembers you. And most people completely throw it away without realizing it. Number 7. Master the graceful exit. Most people don't think about how they leave. And that's exactly the problem. You can have the perfect conversation, full presence, deep listening, genuine celebration, everything right for 20 solid minutes. And then you glance at your phone, say, okay, I should get going, and walk away mid-thought. And just like that, the entire impression quietly unravels. Here's the science behind why. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman discovered something that changes everything about how you think about endings. He called it the peak end rule. Your brain doesn't store an interaction as a whole. It remembers 2 specific moments. The emotional peak, and how it ended. That's it. 2 moments. Out of an entire conversation. The goodbye isn't a formality. It's a final brushstroke on everything that came before it. And most people treat it like an afterthought. The people who are most missed never do. They end with intention. Something like, I really needed this conversation today. Or simply, I'm genuinely glad we talked. Specific, sincere, simple. And then they leave cleanly. No trailing off, no awkward extension. That ending is what gets replayed at 11 p.m. when everything is quiet. Not the whole conversation. Just those final few seconds. That small, intentional close that said, you mattered to me today. 10 extra seconds of intention. That's all it costs. You were never trying to be liked. You were trying to connect. Here's the truth nobody says out loud. Everything we covered, the presence, the listening, the remembering, the validation, the celebration, the restraint, the graceful exit, none of it is a strategy. None of it is a trick. It's just what genuine human connection actually looks like. And it's become so rare that when someone does these things, it feels magnetic. Don't try to implement all 7 habits tomorrow. Pick one, the habit that hit closest to home. Bring it into your very next conversation. See what shifts, not in them, but in you. Because the people who are most missed aren't trying to be missed. They're just genuinely present in a world that has forgotten what presence feels like. And slowly, that becomes who they are. Not what they do. That's the shift. That's the whole thing. If one habit made you stop and think, drop its number in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which one landed hardest for you. If this gave you something today, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want more of this, real psychology, no fluff, subscribe. That's all we do here. New video coming soon. And I think it's going to surprise you.